Hello everyone, I hope you enjoy listening to the story. My name is Eleanor Grace Carter, and I am 33 years old. I bought back the house my mother threw me out of when I was 13, on the exact morning the bank came to evict her. And I stood there in a tailored coat while she clutched the same chipped doorframe she once slammed in my face, still believing the world owed her mercy. The irony almost made me laugh, but my chest felt tight instead. Like something old and buried was scratching its way back to the surface. 20 years ago, that door had closed on a different version of me. A skinny kid with trembling hands and a backpack that was too light for someone being told to survive alone. I remember the rain hitting the pavement in sharp, cold needles, soaking through my shoes as she tossed my clothes onto the driveway like trash. She did not scream. She did not cry. She just looked at me with that flat, tired expression and said I needed to learn how to stand on my own. I kept waiting for her to call me back, to say it was a lesson, a test, something temporary. She never did. The door shut, the lock clicked, and the porch light went out. That sound stayed with me longer than the hunger. Longer than the nights I spent counting cracks in unfamiliar ceilings. Longer than the years it took to stop flinching when people raised their voices. Back then, I still believed mothers were supposed to protect their children. That belief died quietly on that driveway. What replaced it was something colder, something sharper. I learned fast that no one was coming to save me. Not neighbors who peeked through curtains. Not teachers who asked too many questions without wanting answers. Not the woman who gave birth to me. So I adapted. I watched. I listened. I figured out how the world actually worked and, more importantly, who owned it. Standing at the edge of that auction room now, I could see her clearly for the first time in years. Smaller than I remembered, wrapped in denial like it was armor. She had aged, but the stubborn pride in her posture had not changed. She argued with the bank officer like she still had leverage, like consequences were optional. She did not recognize me, not even when I stepped closer. Not even when my name was whispered among the bidders. Maybe that was the final insult, or maybe it was a gift. Because in that moment, I realized I did not need her recognition to finish what had started that night in the rain. The auctioneer's voice cut through the room, numbers rising, tension building. And I felt something settle inside me, steady and controlled. This was not about anger anymore. This was not about proving anything to her. This was about closing a loop that had been left open for 2 decades. I raised my hand without hesitation, my voice calm as I placed the winning bid. And as the gavel struck, I understood something simple and brutal. She had taught me how to survive. I had learned how to own. The first night after she shut the door on me, I learned how quickly the world strips you down to what you can carry and what you can endure. My backpack held 2 shirts, a half-empty notebook, and a granola bar I rationed like it was gold. I slept behind a convenience store because the backlight stayed on all night, and for some reason that made me feel less invisible. The pavement was still warm from the day, but it did not stay that way for long. By midnight, the cold had crawled into my bones, and I remember curling into myself, trying to make my body smaller, like that would somehow make me safer. I did not cry. I think part of me was still waiting for her to come find me, to realize she had gone too far. But morning came, and the only thing that found me was the store owner telling me to leave before customers arrived. That was the moment something shifted. Not dramatically, not like in the movies. Just a quiet understanding settling in my chest. No one was coming. If I wanted to eat, I had to find a way. If I wanted to survive, I had to stop being a child. I started with whatever I could do, without being noticed too much. Cleaning tables at diners for cash, carrying boxes in storage rooms, sweeping floors in places where people did not ask questions. Adults saw me and chose not to look too closely, which turned out to be an advantage. I listened more than I spoke. I learned which managers paid under the table and which ones would call the police. I learned how to stretch $1 across 3 meals, how to sleep in places that were just uncomfortable enough to keep others away, and how to keep my head down when trouble walked in. There were nights I felt like I was disappearing, like the version of me that once had a home was dissolving into something unrecognizable. But there were also moments, small ones, where I noticed patterns. Who owned the buildings? Who collected rent? Who decided who stayed and who got pushed out? It always came back to the same thing: control. And control came from ownership. By the time I was 16, I had moved from survival to observation. I found work with a small cleaning company that handled office spaces after hours. That was where I first saw contracts up close, left on desks by people who assumed no one would read them. Numbers, clauses, signatures. Agreements that decided the fate of entire properties, entire families. I started copying phrases into my notebook, words I did not fully understand yet but knew mattered. Terms like foreclosure, default, lien. They sounded clinical, almost harmless, but I saw what they did in real life. I saw families pack their lives into boxes because a payment was missed. I saw landlords change locks without warning. I saw how quickly a place could stop being yours. Something about that felt familiar in a way I could not ignore. I did not have a mentor in the traditional sense. What I had was access, and I used it. I spent nights in public libraries, teaching myself the language of property law and finance, connecting dots that most people only learned in classrooms I could not afford. I started small, assisting a real estate agent who needed someone willing to work long hours for little pay. I made calls, scheduled showings, cleaned up after open houses. But I paid attention. I watched how deals were structured, how negotiations shifted based on information, how timing could change everything. I learned that houses were not just places people lived in. They were assets, leverage, power. The first time I stood outside a home that was about to be foreclosed, something inside me tightened. The family inside did not know yet. They were still going about their day, unaware that a clock was ticking down on everything they thought was secure. I recognized that feeling before they even experienced it, that thin edge between stability and loss. That was when it clicked for me. This system was not random. It followed rules, predictable ones, and if you understood those rules, you could move within them without being crushed by them. Or better yet, you could use them. Years passed, and I built myself piece by piece. From assistant to licensed agent, from agent to investor, from investor to someone who no longer needed to introduce themselves to be taken seriously. I created a structure around me that did not rely on anyone's approval. Quiet partnerships, strategic acquisitions, decisions made behind the scenes. I did not chase attention. I chased position. And slowly, almost without noticing, I stopped thinking about surviving. I started thinking about owning. It was around that time that I came across her name again. Not directly, not at first. It appeared in a list of delinquent properties, buried among dozens of others. The address caught my eye before the name did. I knew that street. I knew that house. When I saw her name attached to it, I felt a strange stillness settle over me. No anger, no rush of emotion, just recognition. She had refinanced the property multiple times, taken on additional debt, missed payments. The pattern was clear. She had been holding on barely. And now the system she never bothered to understand was about to take everything back. I did not act immediately. Instead, I watched. I pulled records, tracked the timeline, understood every detail of her situation. The outstanding mortgage, the penalties, the looming foreclosure. There was another name tied to the financial strain, someone who had benefited from her decisions, someone she had chosen to support while letting everything else collapse. I did not need confirmation of who the golden child had been. The paperwork told me enough. It always does. That was when I made my move. Not out of impulse, not out of revenge. Out of clarity. I structured my involvement through a separate entity, one that would not trace back to me in any obvious way. I acquired a portion of the debt quietly, positioning myself where it mattered. Not enough to draw attention, just enough to be in the room when decisions were finalized. Every step was deliberate. Every signature, every transfer, Every deadline aligned with a plan that had been forming long before I even realized it. When the official notice of foreclosure was issued, I was already prepared. The date of the auction was set, and all that remained was execution. I remember standing in my office the night before, looking out over a city that had once felt impossibly large and indifferent. Now it felt different, not smaller, but more defined, more understandable. I thought about that night in the rain, about the version of me who had nothing and no one. And I realized something that surprised me. I did not hate her anymore. I did not need to. Hatred is heavy, and I had learned to travel light. What I felt instead was focus. The morning of the auction, I arrived early. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to see it all unfold from the beginning. The room filled slowly, investors taking their seats, conversations low and calculated. And then she walked in. Older, yes. Tired, definitely. But still carrying that same belief that things would somehow bend in her favor. She argued with the bank representative, her voice sharp, insistent. It did not change anything. It never does at that stage. Systems like this do not respond to emotion. They respond to numbers, to contracts, to obligations that have already been broken. I stayed where I was, just another bidder among many, my presence unremarkable. I listened as the details of the property were read aloud, each fact reducing a lifetime of memories into a set of figures and conditions. Starting bid, incremental increases, terms of sale. It was all so clean, so detached from the reality it represented. And yet, this was the language that mattered. This was the arena where outcomes were decided. As the bidding began, I felt that same steady calm settle in again. No hesitation. No second guessing. Just action aligned with intention. I raised my hand at the right moment, my voice clear when I placed my bid, each increase measured, controlled. Others dropped out one by one, the competition thinning as the price climbed. And through it all, she stood there, watching, not yet understanding what was happening, not yet seeing me for who I was. And in that moment, I knew something with absolute certainty. This was never about getting back at her. This was about completing something that had been set in motion years ago. This was about ownership, in every sense of the word. The auctioneer's voice moved like a metronome, steady and indifferent. Each number slicing the air into clean, measured pieces. And I stood there with my hand resting at my side, waiting for the exact moment when hesitation would cost someone else the advantage. Bidders dropped out in predictable patterns, some too cautious, others too aggressive too early. And I let them exhaust themselves while I watched the room, not just the numbers but the reactions. The subtle shifts in posture, the flicker of doubt in their eyes. This was never chaos. It only looked that way to people who did not understand the rhythm. When I raised my hand again, my voice did not rise, did not strain. It cut through clean and calm. And the auctioneer repeated my bid with the same detached tone he had used for every other number, but something in the room shifted. The price had crossed into territory where only those with clear intent would remain. That was where I had always planned to be. She was still arguing with the bank officer when the final round began, her voice sharp, brittle, clinging to fragments of authority that no longer existed, insisting there had to be a mistake, that she needed more time, that this could be fixed. The officer did not even look at her anymore. He had already moved on, already accepted the outcome that had been set in motion long before this morning. Systems do not pause for regret. They do not rewind for second chances. They conclude, and this one was almost finished. Another bidder raised their paddle, a quick, reflexive move, but I saw it for what it was, a last attempt to hold ground without fully committing to the cost. I answered immediately, my bid precise, leaving no room for negotiation. The silence that followed was heavier this time, stretching just long enough to make the room hold its breath. The auctioneer looked around once, twice, searching for any sign of resistance, but none came. The other bidder lowered their paddle slowly, almost reluctantly, and in that moment, it was over. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed louder than it should have, final and absolute. Sold. The words settled into the room like dust after a collapse, quiet but impossible to ignore. Papers shifted, chairs creaked, conversations started again in low murmurs, but for me, everything narrowed to a single point. The agent approached with the contract, polite, efficient, already moving to the next step, as if this were just another transaction among hundreds. To them, it was. To me, it was the closing of something that had begun on a rain-soaked driveway 2 decades ago. I took the pen, feeling its weight between my fingers, and signed my name without hesitation. Clean, deliberate strokes. Ownership formalized in ink. That was when she finally looked at me. At first, it was just curiosity, a reflexive glance toward the person who had just taken everything she was trying to hold on to. Then confusion, as her eyes lingered a second too long, searching for something familiar. Recognition did not come all at once. It unfolded slowly, like a memory she did not want to access, but could not avoid. I watched it happen in real time. The moment her mind connected the face in front of her with the child she had pushed out of her life. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. For the first time since she walked into that room, she was silent. I did not move. I did not offer a greeting, did not soften my expression, did not give her anything she could interpret as invitation. I simply stood there holding the signed contract, the weight of it far greater than the paper itself. She took a step toward me, hesitant now, uncertain in a way I had never seen before. The woman who once spoke in absolute terms, who decided fates with a single sentence, now looked like she was trying to understand the rules of a game she had never bothered to learn. This is not possible, she finally said, her voice lower, stripped of the sharpness it carried moments ago. How are you here? I let the question hang for a second, not because I did not have an answer, but because I knew she would not understand it even if I gave it to her in full. There are things you only learn by living through them, by enduring them, by being forced to adapt when everything familiar is taken away. I had done that. She had not. You told me to survive, I said, my tone even, almost conversational. I did. Her face tightened, the lines around her mouth deepening as she searched for a way to regain control of the situation. I was trying to teach you something, she said quickly, the words coming out in a rush now. You were too dependent, too soft. I had to make you stronger. You cannot blame me for what happened after. There it was. The justification. The reframing of cruelty as necessity. It would have meant something to me once. It would have cut deep, reopened wounds I had spent years closing. But standing there now, it felt distant, almost irrelevant, like listening to a story that no longer belonged to me. You did not teach me, I replied, my voice still calm, still controlled. You removed yourself. Everything after that, I figured out alone. She shook her head, stepping closer, her hands lifting slightly as if she wanted to reach for me but was not sure she had the right. Then help me, she said, and for the first time, there was something close to desperation in her eyes. This house, it is all I have left. We can work something out. I am still your mother. The word hung between us, heavy and fragile at the same time. Mother. It used to mean safety, certainty, belonging. Now it felt like a label without substance, a title disconnected from action. I looked past her for a moment, toward the doorway that led outside, toward the world where this transaction would take effect, where locks would be changed, where ownership would shift in ways that could not be undone. Then I looked back at her, really looked, not as the figure from my past, but as the person standing in front of me now. Someone who had made choices. Someone who was now facing the outcome of those choices. You said I needed to learn how to stand on my own, I said slowly. This is what that looks like. Her shoulders dropped slightly, the fight draining out of her as the reality of the situation settled in. There were no more arguments to make, no more authority to claim. Just consequences, clear and unavoidable. The agent returned, asking for confirmation on the transfer process, his tone professional, detached from the tension unfolding in front of him. I answered without hesitation, confirming every detail, every step that would finalize the transition. Each word moved things forward, away from possibility and into certainty. As the paperwork was completed, I felt something shift inside me, not a surge of triumph, not a wave of satisfaction, but something quieter. Resolution. The kind that does not need to be announced. The kind that settles into place without drawing attention to itself. The loop had closed. The door that once shut on me had led me here, to this exact moment, where I was no longer the one left outside. When it was done, I turned to leave, the contract secured, the outcome decided. She called my name once, soft, uncertain, as if testing whether she still had any claim to my attention. I paused for a brief second, not turning back, just acknowledging that the sound existed. Then I walked out. I did not go back to the house immediately. That would have been too easy, too impulsive, and I had not come this far by acting on emotion. Instead, I let the process unfold the way it was designed to. Legal notices were issued, timelines enforced, locks scheduled to be changed. Everything moved with quiet precision. The same system that once took everything from people now working in my favor because I understood how to navigate it. I watched it all from a distance at first, reviewing documents, confirming transfers, ensuring there were no gaps, no loose ends. Control is not about a single moment. It is about making sure every step after that moment holds. 3 days later, I stood in front of the house again. It looked smaller than I remembered. The paint was worn, the edges of the porch chipped, the yard uneven in a way that told a story of neglect. Time had not been kind to it. Or maybe it had simply revealed what was always there once the illusion of stability faded. I stood at the gate for a moment, my hand resting lightly on the metal latch, feeling the faint vibration of memory rather than anything physical. This was where I had once stood, soaked in rain, waiting for a door that never opened again. Now the gate gave way with a simple push, no resistance, no hesitation. The front door was unlocked, not out of carelessness, but because it no longer mattered to the person who had been holding on to it. I stepped inside slowly, the air stale, carrying a faint scent of dust and something older. Something that had settled into the walls over years. The layout had not changed. The same narrow hallway, the same worn wooden floor that creaked under my weight in almost the exact same places. My body remembered before my mind did. Each step felt familiar in a way that was both grounding and unsettling. I moved through the rooms without rushing. The living room still held the outline of furniture that had been removed. Faint shadows on the floor where weight had pressed down for years. The kitchen was cluttered with remnants of a life that had been unraveling. Unpaid bills stacked near the sink, dishes left unwashed. Small signs of strain that had built up over time. I did not touch anything at first. I just looked, not as a child returning to a place of pain, but as the owner of a property assessing its condition. That shift in perspective was subtle, but it mattered. When I reached the staircase, I paused. The second floor had always felt different, quieter, more personal. That was where my room had been, if it could even be called that. A space just big enough for a bed and a small desk. A place where I had learned to stay out of the way, to make myself smaller, so I would not be noticed. I walked up slowly, each step measured, the sound of my movement echoing slightly in the empty house. At the top of the stairs, the door to that room was still there, slightly ajar. I pushed it open. The room was empty now. No bed, no desk, no trace of the version of me that once existed there. Just bare walls and a window that let in a thin stream of light. For a moment, I stood in the doorway, not stepping in, just observing the absence. It would have been easy to fill that space with emotion, to let memory dictate what I felt. But what I felt instead was clarity. That room had not defined me. It had contained me for a time, but it had never determined who I would become. I stepped inside and walked to the window. From there, I could see the driveway, the exact spot where I had stood that night. The angle was the same. The distance had not changed. Only I had. A sound behind me broke the stillness. I turned slightly, already knowing who it was before I saw her. She had come back. Of course she had. People do not let go of places like this easily, even when they no longer have the right to claim them. She stood in the hallway, just outside the room, her posture hesitant, her expression uncertain. There was no anger in her face now, no sharp edges, just something softer, something closer to fear. "I thought you would come here," she said quietly. I did not respond immediately. Instead, I turned back to the window for a second, letting the silence stretch just enough to settle between us. Then I faced her fully. "This is my property now," I said, my tone neutral. Not cold, not warm, just factual. She nodded slowly, as if accepting something she could not argue against. "I know," she said. I needed to see it one more time." Her eyes moved around the room, taking in the emptiness, the absence of everything that once filled it. There was a heaviness in the way she looked at the walls, as if she was trying to reconstruct something that no longer existed. "You could stay," she added after a moment, the words coming out carefully, like she was testing them. "At least for a little while. We can figure something out. I can fix things." I watched her closely, not the words themselves, but the intention behind them. This was not an apology. It was an attempt to restore a version of reality where she still had some control, some ability to influence the outcome. It was familiar. It was also too late. "There is nothing to fix," I said. Her shoulders tensed slightly, and for a second, I thought she might push back, might return to the version of herself that argued, that demanded. But she did not. Instead, she took a small step into the room, then stopped, as if she was unsure how far she was allowed to go. "I was wrong," she said finally, the words quieter than anything she had said before. "About a lot of things." I held her gaze, steady, not dismissing what she said, but not accepting it as something that could change what had already happened. Regret does not rewrite history. It only acknowledges it. "You were," I replied. The simplicity of that answer seemed to settle something in her. Not resolve it, not erase it, but define it. She nodded once, slowly, then looked past me toward the window again. "So what happens now?" she asked. I turned my attention back to the room, to the space, to the structure that had carried so much weight for so long. Then I stepped past her, moving toward the door. "Now," I said, pausing just long enough for the words to land, "you learn how to stand on your own." I walked out of the room, down the stairs, through the hallway, and toward the front door without looking back. I closed the front door behind me with a quiet click. The same sound that had once marked the beginning of everything I had to endure, now signaling something entirely different, something final. The air outside felt lighter, or maybe it was just me. For a moment, I stood on the porch, looking out at the street that had once felt endless and unforgiving. The place where I had learned that survival was not given, it was taken. Cars passed by without slowing, people moved along their routines, unaware that for me, this small patch of concrete held the weight of 2 decades. And yet it no longer pressed down on me the way it used to. That surprised me more than anything. I walked down the steps slowly, not out of hesitation, but out of awareness, letting each step register, letting the moment settle instead of rushing past it. The driveway was exactly where it had always been, the same cracked surface, the same faint discoloration where rainwater used to collect. I stopped at the edge of it, looking at the spot where I had once stood, soaked and shaking, waiting for a door that never reopened. Back then, I thought that moment defined me. I thought being left behind meant I was worth leaving. It took me years to understand that it said more about her than it ever did about me. Inside the house, I could hear faint movement, slow, uncertain, as if she was still trying to make sense of the space now that it no longer belonged to her. I did not turn back. I did not need to. Whatever needed to be said had already been said, not through words, but through everything that had led to this point. Ownership is not just about property. It is about reclaiming the parts of yourself that were taken, the pieces you had to rebuild without guidance, without protection. And standing there, I realized I had already done that long before I signed my name on that contract. I reached the gate and rested my hand on it for a brief second, the metal cool under my palm. There was no anger left in me, no desire to prolong what had already resolved itself. Some people look for closure and apologies, in reconciliation, in rewriting the past into something softer. I did not. I found mine in clarity, in understanding exactly what happened and choosing what it would mean for me going forward. She had made her choices. I had made mine. As I stepped out onto the sidewalk, I took one last look at the house, not as a symbol of pain, but as something that no longer held any power over me.
It was just a structure now.
Walls, floors, windows. The meaning it once carried had been stripped away, replaced by something quieter, something stronger. I did not need to destroy it to move on.
I only needed to stop being defined by it.
I turned and walked away without looking back again, my step steady, my pace unhurried. The weight I had carried for so long finally settling into something that no longer needed to be carried at all. In the end, I did not win because I took something from her. I won because I finally took myself back. The house was never just a house. It was a memory, a wound, a question that stayed with me for 20 years. And now it is just a place. Nothing more. Nothing less. Some people will say, I was too cold. Others will say, it was justice. But here is the truth. Sometimes, closure does not come from forgiveness. It comes from standing where you once fell and realizing you are no longer the same person. So tell me, if you were in my place, would you have done the same or chosen a different ending? If this story made you feel something, do not forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one.